Hello, my name's Professor Chris White, and I'm going to talk to you about planning for the future in the context of Leicester and the engagement of De Montfort University with Leicester City Council for a project looking at how we use heritage to create economic development. I thought it would be important to give you a context. This is a shot of the campus. It's actually called the Vijay Patel Building. It's where the study of arts and design and architectural practice is undertaken in the centre of the building. There's also a centre for English language learning. Behind that building we do performance arts as well. And to the right there is a set of buildings which encompass media, journalism and other aspects of the creative industries. At a glance, I wanted to show you some stats for the campus, the kinds of worth that we have for the economy, also for the local business communities and local populations, how we work in different ways with all of the sectors that we come into contact with as a university. The growth in the economy is really important, 25.9 billion, and is the largest area within Leicester and Leicestershire for the East Midlands, which is the county agglomeration of the different counties of the East Midlands. We're also second only to London as the best place to start a business, and 35% of business growth has been built in the last 5 years, which is quite incredible. Our workforce at the university includes 2.8 million people who are within 60 minutes drive of the institution. So as an employer, we bring a lot of people to this place as a destination. And then you can see other statistics that relate to our demographic as being a young city, a diverse city, and also ranked top 3 in our student experience, which will have been only of any interest to university individuals. As part of this, our research is really important. It's important because of what we can say about ourselves as an international research institution, and also how we achieved in the last research round, the Research Excellence Framework of 2014. 60% of our research is internationally excellent, and almost a fifth is world leading. We're also increasing the amount of top-rated research in all of our schools of study and strengthening those top-performing areas. Some of the subject areas that cross into heritage and the creative and cultural industries include architecture, built environment, planning, fashion, textiles, materials, manufacturing, product engineering, performance and the visual arts. We're also establishing a number of interdisciplinary themes addressing key societal challenges, including urban life, lifelong well-being, creativity in the digital age, social value, virtual reality, and holography. We have also been very poorly affected by the extended lockdowns during the period from March 2020, when the UK went into its first lockdown, and the nature of lockdowns and localised lockdowns that the city has suffered over the period. And the impact on the pandemic has really decimated creative and cultural sector institutions. Well, not only with loss of revenue and loss of jobs, but also the ways in which social interaction had occurred in the city. Leicester has a very good heritage position. You may have heard of the cathedral, and you may more recently have heard of Richard III, who was found in a car park, not alive, I hasten to add, and has then been celebrated as part of the cultural life of the city. The city centre has also doubled in residential population between 2012 and now, 2021, and is set to double again by 2025. There's also been an increase in the city in the hotel stock, and again this is building towards 2023. The campus for De Montfort University has also been transformed with investments above 150 million, and we stand to improve and reuse buildings in different ways based on our analysis of what's happened in the COVID pandemic. Key attractions prior to the pandemic were the National Space Centre, the Leicester Museum and Art Galleries, of which there is a network of interconnected sites, the cathedral itself, given the discovery of King Richard III's remains, and also the Roman Centre of Leicester, which also has a scheme for development into a museum and interactive space coming on stream in 2023. So the Leicester City Council and De Montfort University have been working together on a number of aspects over many years related to some of these developments, and more recently we've been awarded monies to work alongside one another to build a Heritage Action Zone project supported by English Heritage, the Arts Council and the National Lottery, which comes in around £2 million. The idea of this is it will raise the profile of the city and its future drive of investment, the use of historic buildings for community engagement, but also attracting new businesses and city-based residents who may use the city in a way which we haven't thought about before.
So I wanted to talk next about a philosophy of practice of heritage and cultural heritage, and the relationship of all of those as part of policy for the development of heritage. The relationship of the state and the individual has always been a contested ground within the United Kingdom, and different bodies have been invoked to look after the heritage of the society. English Heritage, now renamed Historic England, has also not only had a name change, but also cultural shifts over the last few decades. Government interventions have usually been caused by market failure. Private residences owned by landowners found that they couldn't really afford to maintain them. And at that point, there was a crisis of understanding, and the state moved in to try and keep what was desirable, learning about the history of these buildings, and also helping those buildings create and project a national identity and social cohesion. Listed buildings, as part of a planning process, the regulations for building and planning, and public investments in heritage buildings through grants have enabled conservation. There's been a very specific political change in order to do that. And the reification of Britishness has, if you like, been questioned throughout the last decade. What is Britishness has been questioned by devolution, and the 4 countries of the United Kingdom have been looking at their identity. Scotland in particular has invested a great deal in its heritage in order to promote its identity. Similarly, Brexit has impacted on the notion of a collective consciousness about the broader access to heritage and culture and the participation within it. Interestingly, the per capita investment related to identity for Scotland, Wales and England is proportionally 952 in the investment in the structures of heritage. The state support for tourism, which really is believed to be self-supporting and not needing any state support, has been thrown into sharp relief by the pandemic. But even prior to that, the understanding of a statistical relationship between what might be classed as heritage and culture has been tried to be priced and costed. So the formation of a Department for Culture, Media and Sport, not surprisingly, began to use measures of success that could be related to all of those aspects. So heritage was reviewed and researched as part of, and important to, well-being, with happiness as a measure of success. And part of this has come about because developed countries have considered happiness to be a measure of success for that country, alongside, and maybe more importantly, than GDP. So rubrics have been brought forward to suggest how valuable heritage might be, as opposed to other forms of engagement. And there is actually a statistic that was brought forward in 2014, undertaken by the department, suggesting that if you visited heritage, it was going to produce a value to you of happiness and engagement of about £1,646, as opposed to sport, where engagement with that would just bring you £1,000 worth of engagement. And the arts was worked out as £1,152.50. Not quite sure how these figures would come about, but that's what was produced. So departments, especially within government and probably across the world, are always trying to justify through metrics the ways in which they can demonstrate the value of the intangible and valueless according to modern measures of GDP, because that's the only way they can state their claim to funds. So state support for heritage in the United Kingdom has relied on a policy of instrumentalism, a justification through positive economic impact, as I've kind of described in the figures that were used by the DCMS. The creation of English Heritage in 1983 to be the body that would enable a productive and business-like approach to culture and heritage also had to unfold prospects of tourism, and all of these being properly managed in the thinking that this was an industrial process. Heritage industry, cultural industry, tourism industry. This has enabled us to consider all of these things as part of industries that people take from and work within. It produced a kind of nationalisation of museums, galleries and sports. And it was actually borrowed from Australian understanding of the commodification of the creative nation and built into the Tony Blair years of what the DCMS was going to look at and how they rebranded all of these things as the creative industries to try to demonstrate that it provided employment and prosperity for the nation and also monetised the unit of that creation. Again, because round the table, health and education will always trump heritage. In 2004, Tessa Jowell tried to develop the nation of the relationship of government and creative industries to be demonstrated as the personal value to you as an individual of engagement, raising then your responsibility almost to partake of that engagement, to visit heritage sites, to undertake sport and to be part of cultural environments. The value of this instrumentalist approach, though, has been to and fro with the changes of government, and it's either instrumentally demonstrated through economics or judgment, and judgment has been correlated to excellence. Surely, if we produce places of excellence and heritage of excellence, then that is the thing in itself. The review of this, though, was done by McMaster in 2008 and buried because there was a reshuffle in government. In 2010, the coalition decided that they were going to go for the excellence model, but due to the financial crisis, they had to make other judgments. And of course, heritage, culture, the creative industries moved to the bottom of the queue. The return to an instrumentalist approach occurred in 2013. And with Maria Miller, who is the Secretary of State, suggested that the creative industries, as they were then, should make the case for their existence. And we go back to that economic base of instrumentalism. How much are we valuable for? In 2014, it was recognised that there was more than the economic case to be made, and that we needed to find data that not only demonstrate the positive effect on the economy and society, which is why if you look at the reports from the 1980s right through to 2014, there are so many that can demonstrate the value of the creative and cultural industries, including heritage, because the numbers have been worked through so many times. And it was agreed that roughly £5 billion worth of money from those industries, from heritage particularly, goes towards GDP. But there's a flaw in this argument because it doesn't take on other priorities. As the government and political agendas have moved forward, different value judgments have been applied to demonstrating value. And sustainable development is one of them, where it meets the needs of the present without compromising the future needs. And various pillars of inclusion have been used to demonstrate sustainable development: economic growth, social inclusion, environmental balance. They're still quite vague in terms of an organising concept. And UNESCO and the EU adopted into this a fourth pillar, cultural vitality. And this was concerned about those things that are ephemeral and irreplaceable resources. So the fourth pillar, cultural vitality, became part of the national planning framework for the United Kingdom. Whether it's been very well applied in terms of long-term decision making is perhaps open to question. But heritage needs to be able to influence mainstream policy. And so sustainable development per se has to also look at that instrumentalist data. And the next part of its case is built on production factors. And production factors comes from economic theory. It's usually considered to be a cost to the state that has no return. It's seen to be undertaken as a moral duty to be a civilized society. And cultural heritage has been seen as part of the European society's, more broadly, welfare, and environmental neglect has severe impacts. So protection is considered in both micro and macroeconomics. So heritage, like environment, suddenly becomes considered, hence the development of the tourism industry. The other aspect to production factors is what heritage and culture brings to the environment to attract other businesses. Again, many studies have shown that actually investment in local environments does bring more business. People want to locate high-value businesses in culturally attractive cities where workers can be employed, and also those workers have civilized places to do business. They are next to and within locations in historic areas, and the heritage enables innovation. It's the intangible events such as festivals and other kinds of enhanced richness for life that those businesses and people in general are attracted to. Now, this isn't particularly new as an idea. 1300s, Renaissance Italy, Siena, Florence, the Medicis, they all understood the investment in the local city. They also understood at that time how you could outdo one another with your palazzo and invest in the environment and make a statement as well. But once you agree that heritage is a production factor, then things can begin to change, because it brings in relationships with the private sector. So now we've got an instrumentalist, data-led approach, and we've also got production factor approach, where we can prove something and something is inherently good. The third aspect of this is the commons principle. The communal arrangement for collective land and property are common. The also protection of the common use and the common space from overuse and threats to that. And how that governance doesn't really fit. It's neither central or private. And it's within this construct that the Leicester streets are being developed, where there is a cultural resource. It does have a bit of a production factor. The streets are essentially the commons. They benefit the city. Deteriorations of the fabric of those streets would actually destroy the commonly owned asset. And the community and culturally owned collective and socially developed schemes and styles of governance are what I'm working with at the moment to try to make sure that though heritage commons, the things, the buildings, the spaces that are really belonging to the local people's space and environment, whilst might be privately owned, are in a way given to the local people to perceive and see how they want to live in those city spaces. So we have a perception that the state should look after the heritage rather than citizens, because there's a bit of a clash between what people might want to do with it as opposed to the experts, the curators, the researchers, people like academics who want to give a view about buildings. So we have what Edmund Burke referred to as a society where there's a coalition between the living, who have this construct of being either experts or local people and having a view, the dead, who probably have been involved in some of the heritage and its beginnings, and those yet to be born, and that intergenerational equity of the value of heritage. We know as a university we have an involvement in the structures of culture and heritage. We have our own buildings, as I've shown you earlier, and those are part of now a building heritage for the city. And the spaces we have created also offer social engagement. And our new Vice-Chancellor has recently been involved with the Renewal Fund, expressing this and its relationship to what has occurred in the lockdown. So spaces devoted to social engagement and community interaction were forced to close during the lockdown, and the well-being benefits of engagement as well as jobs with art and culture were lost. And that's believed to be a given, as outlined in the earlier commentary I've given about the development of a political notion of heritage and culture. Artistic and cultural activities provide communities with a chance to learn about the historical, cultural, social and economic character of the city. And these activities contribute to a sense of place, identity and well-being. So as a civic university, we're involved in working with the Leicester City and the County Council to look for investments that come through public and private initiatives and governmental drives to aid the recovery of the economy and the growth in the region. And one of these is the development at the railway station, which we are bidding for in order to improve accessibility for the railway station. And also it's the gateway into the city that leads into the Heritage Action Zone, which has also been funded by Historic England to upgrade the environment to make people feel better about the place and space they live and work in. And another part of that is a composite of buildings that are heritage buildings that are going to focus on the new, the future, Leicester's creative design community, and also encourage what we need for that intergenerational economic structure, graduate retention. So Pilot House will become a creative startup hub This is a mock-up of the entrance area. It used to be a loading bay, which will be refurbished and opened up as a cafe centre where people can work in some of the units that are behind this frontage, and where we would expect our startups and creative entrepreneurs to want to work. The value of this composite of buildings, you can see what I've just shown you is the loading bay with the two highlighted windows in the previous diagram, is how these buildings all network together. The theory is that many of these spaces will have different functions and uses. There's around 80,000 square foot of underutilised council space, and it is actually a collection of heritage buildings. There's probably a debate as to who would prefer different types and styles of those heritage, but it might go back to trying to prepare spaces for both the living, the dead, and those yet to be born. This will also hopefully create a nighttime economy, a destination for events as well. And it strengthens the creative industries in the city. It will hopefully start some new startups, and we think we will have a leather conservation centre there, which will have mixed use, involve that graduate retention that I've talked about. Leicester is a city which has 50% less graduate retention than other university towns, so this is quite a big priority for both the university and the city, given the economic benefit of younger people and their spend. This is a mock-up from one of our architecture students, and it's looking at some different areas of the city where you've got that juxtaposition of what this individual has called dynamic living. Ultimately, you're trying to preserve and reify the heritage culture to give a flavour, aesthetic and atmosphere, but in amongst it, you may end up with high-rise living, which actually is attractive as opposed to derelict. So this is the wide brief that Historic England has. It's the public body that helps people care for, enjoy and celebrate England's spectacular historic environment, from beaches and battlefields to parks and pie shops. And it's worth noting that Historic England is for England only, and these developments in heritage are devolved to the four nations. Historic England says they protect, champion and save the places that define who we are and where we've come from as a nation. And with all of the bids into Historic England, these are selected by a panel, and all of it is competitive. We care passionately about the stories they tell, the ideas they represent, and the people who live and work and play among them. Working with communities and specialists, we share our passion, knowledge and skills to inspire interest, care and conservation, so everyone can keep enjoying and looking after the history that surrounds us all. So ultimately, where do we put our energies? We need to always demonstrate the economic data and use whatever the influences we can bring to that to change the debate. But we also have to argue the importance of heritage beyond government objectives of economy, fairness and aspiration, and perhaps national identity and role in the world. But these aspects are worth considering under any project. The production factor, which is the economic output, where these industries, if we're going to call them the creative industries, and heritage in particular, becomes like a material construct, coal, copper, tin, and the investment in it brings a return that we can fully demonstrate, and it's protected because of its economic productivity. Fairness and aspiration should reside within the soul of the people, the local people and people who want more out of their lives, who have an aspiration to live in beautiful spaces and to be able to visit different and interesting cultural items and artifacts and experiences. And then there's the commons, the shared responsibility of local pride, civic ownership and private ownership, the spirit of the historic spaces that we want to share for the collective good. And lastly, probably what is becoming very important since Brexit is the UK role in the world. Interestingly, the UK is actually one of the top 3 destinations in the world for tourism. And heritage really attracts talent and businesses who wish to work in the UK, in particular cities that have a style and a look that is attractive. So heritage isn't just about money. It needs to be prosperous, however, but it does produce a coherent and cohesive society. This is an image of Granby Street that leads into the city from the railway station. So it is actually the artery into the city, which if you're using public transport, which we want people to do more of in the future in order to make for a more sustainable city, then we're looking to try to develop the shop fronts. Clearly, this is an historic review of Granby Street, and also it's beautifully coloured, and it's to show off the nature of the heritage and definitely reify it. You've got the Grand Hotel on the left there, and many of the shops outlined. So as part of Historic England's new initiatives, they've developed heritage action zones, and there are 167 of them across England. And the idea is for them to give out money through competitive bidding to change the streets that people live and work in. And the Heritage Action Zone that we have in Leicester is developing Granby Street, the image I've just shown you. Also is developing another street called Churchgate, which has a conservation area already attached to it. And we've recently been told we can develop one building on the high street. We did originally have 3 streets in our bid, but we were asked to reduce it to just the 2 streets as they tried to spread the money and the bidding across more towns and cities of England. Running alongside the Action Zone bid, which is intended to develop shop fronts and second floor living spaces, so trying to take what might be derelict or private owned spaces that are simply vacated at present because the owners either don't have the investment to change the spaces or simply are sitting on the real estate, into places where people can live and work. So the aspects of our Heritage Action Zone bid, we're looking at how can we animate those places, make it more attractive to live in and also to work in. Alongside that main bid is a cultural programme, and that cultural programme is looking at ways to calendarise what happens for the city in those city centre areas, what makes them distinctive, and how can we create an annualised set of activities that people become familiar with and help with that identity. What all of the projects are working on is enabling partnerships. So there's a consortium that delivers the cultural programme. The partnership working is inherently threaded through the Heritage Action Zone projects for particular buildings, working with private and public money, but also in partnership to create whatever it is that both parties think can be the best thing for the living, the dead, and the yet to be born. So enabling that partnership working through shared endeavour, common values, and local engagements. We've built most of the activities around the kinds of open streets activities that already occur in Leicester. So there's historical reconstructions, there's comedy festival, there's a bikeability project where young people who have learned how to use their bicycles come in with their families and go into routes towards the city, who visit different types of activities, and then street festivals that engage people in terms of the sorts of things we can do. And later this year, COVID permitting, we'll be running a design festival in the streets to showcase Leicester as a design city. So the Granby Street I shown you earlier is actually this. So this is a reverse shot. You still have the Grand Hotel now on the right-hand side, which you may remember from the architecture. But what we've done here is we've simulated how we feel that this street can become something for the future. In particular, considering the greening of Granby Street, trying to think of Granby Street as a destination for a cafe society, for outdoor living. We have some more outlandish aspects to this, which include bus stops where you can pick your own veg and other types of organic matter. We had to be quite careful about how much green matter we placed on historic buildings, because Historic England experts felt that it wasn't sustainable and would ruin the architecture. So we have a balance there of creating the aspiration of the space and aesthetic that actually people would like to enjoy, and also pedestrianise and yet provide access, but also make sure that it is for the future. The work on the Action Zone and the Cultural Programme will continue now till 2024. As part of this, we'll be looking at what people are thinking about the current spaces and places they work in. We'll be trying to find out what their commons sense of the landscape and the places they live and work in already is, and hopefully get their engagement to develop that. We will also be collecting the data in order to prove at the end of the process that there has been economic development, that we can instrumentally show that there is a difference to what is developed and that it has had a good and positive effect that we can drill down and produce a quantified figure for. And then we will also have created a space and place, hopefully, for people to feel better, safer and healthier within. Thank you.